So I watched Rebel Moon Part 2. And boy, oh boy, what a fucking disappointment that was. I am not a fan of the first Rebel Moon. I think it's a garbage knockoff of Seven Samurai. It was a terrible adaptation. I know it's supposed to be Zack Snyder's take on Star Wars. It didn't feel like a take on Star Wars. It just felt like a crappy sci-fi film with way too big of a budget and way too much slow motion. But I reserve judgment. Hey, it's a part 1. Maybe, just maybe, I didn't understand. Maybe the first movie just had too much to set up, too much world building, too many characters to establish. So part 2 was going to be the culmination of all of it. We were going to get all the payoffs, and we were going to get all this story and character development and all these cool things were going to happen, and all of what was set up in part 1 would pay off in part 2, and it'd be like just a really long movie, and that's why I didn't understand. Okay, so I went into part 2. I said, hey, you know what, I'm not a fan of part 1, but maybe part 2 will prove me wrong. Maybe part 2 will be all the things that part 1 needed to be, and it wasn't. Rebel Moon Part 2 is shorter by not a lot, by like 12 minutes. It's shorter than part 1 and feels longer than part 1 significantly. It is extremely slow and plotting. There is not much going on in the first half of this film at all, which I think is supposed to be a way of building tension, so when the action finally does kick in, it feels satisfying and earned. It doesn't feel like that at all. The first half of this movie is a lot of people sitting around and talking, and a significant amount of slow motion of people working in a field harvesting grain. And when I say a significant portion, I literally mean there is an inordinate amount of shots of people walking around in a field in slow motion harvesting grain. Not saying things, not talking to each other, just smiling and harvesting grain. Apparently, Zack Snyder thinks that the best way to implement slow motion is to just implement it in all scenes where things are happening and people aren't talking. If people aren't talking, you can almost guarantee the scene's going to be in slow motion. That is how this whole movie plays out. It picks up with the event where the events of Rebel Moon 1 left off. Our main antagonist, I believe his name is Noble. He is They resurrect him. Spoilers. It's not really a spoiler. It's literally in the trailer. They tell you that's going to happen. They also tell you at the end of the movie, the first movie, it's going to happen. They bring him back, and he's angry and mad about stuff. And for being a sci-fi film and supposed to be a take on Star Wars, you would assume at some point maybe there would be some interesting power sets or interesting technology usage or anything that I could look at and go, wow, that feels like Star Wars, but not quite Star Wars. Like the weird not lightsabers that they have. At least that kind of feels like a Star Wars thing. No, in this movie, just like in the first movie, all the farmers just dress like regular ass farmers. They just overalls and clothes you can get anywhere. It doesn't feel like it's the future or a distant planet somewhere, or like this is a different world than the world we live in. They're just farmers. All the bad guys in the Imperium, the Empire, you would think, okay, cool, the Empire. Well, Star Wars had characters like Darth Vader, and you had stormtroopers that were in interesting costumes and all this stuff, and there's really interesting color schemes and color dynamics, whites and blacks and grays and all this stuff. No, they dress like Nazis. The bad guys who are Nazis dress like Nazis. They wear the shitty, gross brown uniforms or shitty, gross green uniforms. I think that they decided at some point when the Imperium was picking out their color dynamic, they were just going to shit on the floor, and whatever came out was supposed to be the color scheme that they used, because that's what it fucking feels like. Okay? Everything in the Imperium is gray, is brown or green or some form of both, or like a dark, off-putting gray. There are very few like contrast colors within it. The whole movie feels very washed out when you look at the color scheming of it. This movie sucks, okay? It's bad. I would argue that it's better than the first movie because the action at least is a little bit more interesting. But honestly, it's just the same kind of stuff as the first movie. Very similar set pieces. Ships flying around, crashing into each other. I feel like at least in the first movie, we had different places that we went to. In this movie, it's literally you're in a ship, or you're on a farm, or you're in a ship, or you're in a farm, or you're in a ship you're in a ship on the way to a farm, or you're in a ship on the way to another ship, or you're inside a different ship in the past. There is very few set pieces in this movie. None of them feel unique or interesting. There's a plot line here, where you finally get like some fucking character development. But here's the thing. It's not even like regular normal character development, like as you're going through and these people are working in the fields, you think you get to know them. Literally, there's a whole section of the movie where all the heroes that are gathered together sit down with each other and just tell their backstories. And not even in an interesting way. You get like a brief clip that's all in slow motion, mind you, of just their backstories, where they just tell you what happened to them and how they got to where they got. You have a character, you know, that uses the not lightsabers, and she has these cybernetic arms, and she explains, my family was killed, and we had these cybernetic arms in a briefcase, so I cut my arms off and put them on my body. And you go, oh, okay, that's what you did? That's how you got those arms? Wow, that's really fucking interesting. Oh, I used to be a disgraced general. And you go, okay, wow, what happened? Well, I was a general, and I was disgraced, and my people got killed, and so I left. And you go, oh, okay, I thought that was going to be more interesting than that. Literally, it's just people telling you what their backstories are at a table. And every time they get done telling their backstory, they cut to one of the characters in a single... And I'm not even kidding you, because this happens at least twice. Maybe it happened 3 times. It's so fucking boring, I can barely remember. But literally, a character goes... I had a very tough backstory. It was very sad. Cut to slow motion of their backstory that they literally just explained playing out in front of you. Cut back from their story, and that's the end of it. And you look over, and one of the characters... and there's like a single tear coming down their face. And I'm not kidding you, because it happens that enough that I noticed. I was like, wait a minute, is that the same shot as earlier? No, because the tear's in a different place. It's just them sitting around, not even like really crying, like really like feeling anything. It's just like a character with a tear coming down their face. And that's supposed to be the culmination of like their backstories and how you get to know these characters. And it's all just one time. It was like Zack Snyder realized partway through the movie, oh shit, I got to tell these people's backstories so you're interested in them. So they just like sat him down at a table and said, hey, we're just going to film you guys. Just read the script, tell everybody what happened to you, and we'll move on from there. Get that out of the way, because that's not interesting. I would have been interested. Literally, the other part of it is our main character, we find out more of her backstory, the Scar Giver. She's known as the Scar Giver, okay? So the second movie should really be about her a lot. And for the most part, I guess it kind of is, but we literally get more of her backstory by her talking about it in bed with her, like, boyfriend, I don't know, like main squeeze booty call guy. Everybody, every time that there's any kind of story growth or character development or anything like that, it's just people sitting around talking. And they explain to you what happens, and then you get a fucking cutscene where it shows you what happened as they're explaining what happened, and then they fucking move on. And then the next scene is a bunch of people standing in a field in fucking slow motion, or people standing there talking to each other, and then they stop and smile at each other in slow motion. Then you get to the second half of the movie, okay, and the bad guys show up, and they, you know, they're still talking about this fucking grain. They're like, yeah, we want this grain from you guys. We really need this fucking food from you guys. That's what we're here for. But they're not here for that. They're actually here to get the main character, because she's the most wanted person in the galaxy. You would assume if somebody's the most wanted person in the galaxy, they would send more than one fucking dreadnought that's run by an admiral that literally died by the hand of the person you're trying to find. You would think they'd go, fuck, let's send a couple of these dreadnoughts out and do this. But no, they don't. And I guess it's supposed to be because the bad guy that was disgraced by her is like, no, I want all the glory and all the clout for it. I'm like, not a single person has reported in and talked about what happened. Did nobody call the Imperium and say, yo, our admiral just died, I don't know what to fucking do? No, none of that. Second half of the movie is just the action. Oh, you know, first of all, I don't understand the timeline in this movie. They were apparently supposed to have like 3 days to gather all the grain, which is like supposed to be impossible for them to do. But they're supposed to, they have 5 days to do it. It was supposed to be impossible to do. And the Imperium's coming in 5 days. So they spend like the first 3 days the Imperium supposed to be coming back to gather all the grain that they can, and they manage to do it, and they're going to use it so that they don't get bombarded by the Imperium. They're like, yo, they want this grain so badly, they won't shoot us with, like, from orbit if we have all this grain everywhere. Okay, I'm like, all right, whatever. And then they gather the grain in slow motion, okay, and then the next 2 days they just spend training them in how to fight in slow motion for the most part. But it's really helpful and useful that everybody that is being trained happens to be a fucking crack shot or know how to use, like, melee weapons extremely well. Because literally it's a montage of everybody just being really fucking good at shooting things. It's not, oh shit, I missed, or oh, I'm bad at shooting things, or oh man, I really need to learn how to use weapons or be a good fighter or anything. No, it's none of that. Everybody can shoot a fucking gun really well. Everybody's really fucking good at shooting guns no matter what. And then they show, like, oh, hey, we're going to use melee combat. And the guy pulls out a sword. He goes, we're going to teach you how to do this. I'm going to teach you combat. And so then the chick with the cybernetic arms, who already knows how to fight good with swords, she just cuts up this dummy with a sword. Doesn't explain anything. And they're like, yeah, like that. And then you just show everybody doing the same fucking thing that she did. You go, oh, okay. So I guess these farmers probably could have defended themselves in the first place. They didn't really need all these other people here. Okay? I don't know. It's weird. And then, you know, they hire these different people, okay, non-lightsaber chick. You got this other guy, you know, the beast tamer or whatever. He's supposed to be like, he tamed this giant, like, fucking griffin creature or whatever, who's not in this fucking movie, by the way. And then you have, like, General Titus or whatever, and he's like a disgraced general. He's supposed to be like a leader and a strategist and all this stuff. And he's probably the only one that does anything interesting. He's probably the only one that does any kind of actual job. He does his actual job or speciality. He's like, yo, we're going to, like, do guerrilla warfare, and we're going to set these weapons up here and move this shit around here. And Mike goes, okay, yeah, we'll do it. So they at least he does his fucking job. The beast tamer doesn't bring any fucking beasts to the fight. He just walks around dual wielding axes in the future with laser guns. At least the Jedi chick does what she's supposed to do. She has 2 swords. But yeah, there's a fucking fight, I guess. It goes very similar to all the other fights, even the fight in the first movie. They shoot at each other a whole bunch. People get stabbed. People get shot. The Nazis get beat up, and then the Nazis show up with more Nazis, and they deal with those really easily. And the Nazis show up with more Nazis, and they all look scared like something bad's gonna happen, and they deal with them really quickly. And then they pull like an Obi-Wan shit where the main character goes on the dreadnought. She sneaks aboard the dreadnought or whatever to like destroy the dreadnought so that it doesn't like cause more problems. And I don't fucking know. This movie ends just as it started, super fucking boring and on a fucking cliffhanger. So the part 3 that we haven't even got green lit is maybe the part 3 is going to be where all of it comes together. Maybe I'm just stupid. Maybe I don't fucking understand film. Maybe the first part of the movie is supposed to be the slow plotting, like, setup, and part 2 is supposed to be like the part where, you know, they give you all the character backstory. Mind you, they give it all while everybody's sitting around a fucking table. And maybe part 3 is the part that'll finally make it all come together and be really good. But I don't know, because there hasn't been a part 3 greenlit. So I don't even know if there's going to be a part 3. But here's the thing. Movies, even if you have movies that are based on each other, okay, if you have a part 1 and you have a part 2, then part 1 and part 2 have to go together seamlessly, and it has to be continuation of part 1, and it has to pay off the parts of part 1 that were set up. But there was nothing set up in part 1. They just tell you everything that happened, and then they tell you something else is going to happen, and then that thing happens, and then that's the end of it. So part 2 really didn't need to happen other than the bad guys go, you know what, we're not going to give up yet. So what's part 3 going to be? The bad guys come back and they didn't give up again? I don't fucking know. Rebel Moon Part 2 sucks. And like I said, I think it might be maybe better than the first one. When the action got going, I was less bored than I had been. But the other part of it is the first part of the movie is so fucking boring that it makes part 1 look like a masterpiece. I would not recommend anybody waste their time watching this film. It gets a fucking D- from me. The only reason it doesn't get an F is because the actors at least are decent. That's the other thing too. Here's the thing. You're gonna fucking cast actors like this in this movie. You have a great list of newcomers. You also have a great list of veteran actors, and you can't even utilize them to their fullest because literally your idea of good acting is for them to sit there with a single tear coming down their cheek after they sat there talking to each other around a fucking picnic table. Fuck this movie. It's not good. It's not worth your time. I hope part 3 doesn't get greenlit because I don't think it's worth anyone's time. I don't want to waste another moment of my time thinking about maybe I should watch part 3 so I can do a review of it, or maybe I should talk about part 3, or maybe I should watch it because maybe it'll finally pay off and I won't have wasted my time watching part 1 and 2. Fat chance of that happening.